Hello and welcome to FTD Talk. My name is John James and I am a writer and campaigner for male victims of female perpetrated domestic violence and an advocate for men's mental health. In this episode I'll be talking to author Jesse Bering, somebody that I love the writing of and is the author of Perv, Sexual Deviant and All of Us. Why is the penis shaped like that? And the book that we will be discussing, Suicide, Why We Kill Ourselves. In the interview I found myself thinking a entirely different way about suicide. There's a lot of things that I didn't know, and I think you out there will find it very interesting. So check out my conversation with Jesse Bering. But before you do, don't forget to smack that like button, smash that subscribe button. The bigger the channel gets, the more people I can help. You take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Peace. Okay, welcome Jesse to FTD Talk.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
We're here today to talk about your book, How We Kill Ourselves, Suicidal and Why We Kill Ourselves, sorry. But before we start, could you tell me a little bit about your story that brought you to write the book?
Well, it's quite convoluted, I suppose. I have always been, I guess, interested in the subject of suicide as a sort of intellectual problem, but also personally, emotionally. I've definitely had episodes in my own life story, I suppose, that had brought me precipitously close to the edge in terms of my own suicidal feelings. And those have fluctuated over the years in terms of their intensity and also the reasons that I've, I guess, felt these really negative emotions that have put me in that position. I call it the call to oblivion, sort of this feeling of seeking peace, I suppose, in mindlessness, escaping my own, deep, recurring episodes of rumination. And they go all the way back, I guess, to my teenage years. I've had periods, I suppose, where I would be clinically diagnosed as suicidal even from the time I was 15 or 16 years old, up until my 30s, I would say. And like I said, those have changed over the years. When I was a teenager in high school, I think the most difficult time for me was, coming out of the closet, being gay, sort of recognizing my own sexuality and how that didn't necessarily accord, at least with the times in the community that I was living. I was growing up in a small town in Ohio in Midwest US, sort of in the 80s and 90s. And it wasn't definitely something that you could disclose without fear of significant ostracism and denouncement from your peers. So I did everything I possibly could to stay in the closet. I dated girls, and I couldn't, I couldn't possibly be honest with myself or with other people about my feelings. And I think, as a very vivid example, I can give you, when I was, I guess, about 16, I felt this tremendous pressure to, well, I mean, like any teenager, you've got love interest, and I was completely infatuated with another student in my class, and I wrote him a letter, sort of disclosing my feelings for him. And it was tortuous for me, but I felt like I needed to do it. It was cathartic in some meaningful way, and this was long before email and the internet and all those types of things. It was a handwritten letter. And it would be even more catastrophic, I think, if there was email at that time. But I wrote him a letter and I put it in the mail, and I guess waiting for him to receive it over that period of a day or two, I came to regret the fact that I had mailed it, and him sort of getting it, and whether he would tell other people, and my secret getting out. And I was literally on the edge. I was on a bridge and I was about to jump.
Wow.
And it turned out that I got his mailing address wrong, so it was never actually delivered, and it was returned to me. And it was this immense sense of relief at that time. But that was my earliest memory, I suppose, of this feeling of wanting to die before other people knew what I was, or sort of being exposed to other people sort of judging me or evaluating me and being at the center of their attention. So this is a subject, I guess, that is close to my heart. This what I suppose is the mystery of why people kill themselves, the subtitle of the book. Mm-hmm. For me, it all boils down to what it means to be human. And what it means to be human is the fact that we are overly preoccupied and concerned with what other people think about us. And this is actually, I'm a psychologist now, and fast forward, 30 years. And one of the things that makes human beings very different from other species is the fact that we are preoccupied by what other conspecifics, or what other human beings think about us. So in psychological terms, social cognition, this is known as a theory of mind. I have a theory about what other people are thinking about me. I can't, like, I'm talking to you right now and I can't see what you're thinking. I see your body kind of moving around in different ways, and I make attributions to you based on what I'm seeing. I make inferences about your psychological states, whether you understand what I'm saying, whether you agree with me, whether you don't like what I'm saying, whatever. These all involve what's called a theory of mind. I have a theory about the psychological states that are causing your behaviors.
Yeah.
So I see you as a mental agent, basically. But most of the evidence suggests that this is something fundamentally unique, or at least specialized in terms of human cognition. We are the animal kingdom's natural psychologist. That's a term that Nicholas Humphrey used. He's an evolutionary biologist. That we are constantly thinking about what other people think about us, what other people think about what we think, and so on. So if I were a chimpanzee looking at you right now, or my dog, I would just see your behavior. I would just see you moving around in different ways, and I would see you, your eye movement and so on. But I wouldn't necessarily be thinking about what you're thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that is the crux of what makes being a human so difficult. This sense of being in the crosshairs, basically, of other people's minds. So these emotions like guilt and shame and pride, these are all things that are contingent on our ability to take the perspective of somebody else. And that, I think, is what makes us potentially suicidal, if we are overly preoccupied with that, and it affects us emotionally.
Do you think you're if you have a negative way of thinking about yourself, do you think that reflects onto other people then? Do you think that you see negativity in how people see you because of how you think about yourself?
Yeah, and that's why it's called a theory, because it's not necessarily true. Theory of mind, I have a theory about why you're, it could be completely biased or delusional in terms of what other people are thinking about me. I mean, in reality, most people don't care that much about what's happening in the other people's minds and so on. But we sort of exaggerate or overinflate our importance in other people's minds, if you know what I mean. So if you were to, for instance, I don't know, just start screaming right now and run out of the room, I could come up with all sorts of hypotheses about, I don't know why you're doing that, but I could come up with all sorts of hypotheses about why you're doing that. Maybe you left the iron on in the other room and you're afraid that it's going to be, there's going to be a fire in the house, or maybe you have some sort of psychiatric disorder. Maybe somebody that I can't hear is calling you from the other room. All these things would involve me making attributions to what you're currently thinking, but they could be wrong. And I think that when we are suicidal, we're much more likely to be egocentric.
Yeah.
In the sense of thinking that we are more at the center of people's consciousness than we are in reality.
Yeah.
And this is why, I think that teenage suicide gets a lot of attention, and for good reason, I suppose, but also why adolescents are particularly prone to suicidal thinking is largely because they are in this developmental stage of thinking that they are sort of, larger than life characters, or they're sort of living these dramatic episodes that other people are sort of watching. It's sort of this imaginary audience that when you're a teenager, you think that you're the center of other people's attention, when in reality you're kind of just a blip on their radar.
I mean, I have my own, that's why I wanted to talk to you, and that's why I find suicide fascinating. I have my own relationship with suicide, my own sort of half attempt when I was going through abuse. My granddad committed suicide, and after my grandma died, and my neighbor committed suicide by shooting himself in the head with a rifle, an air rifle, 8 times, and he had to reload after every shot. So we really wanted to do it.
Yeah.
But we've talked about the sort of factors that people go through to be suicidal. But is there a person that's more vulnerable than somebody else?
I think people that are perfectionists are especially vulnerable to suicidal thinking. They hold themselves to a very high standard in terms of what they subjectively sort of consider to be a successful person. And this is actually kind of counterintuitive, because you would think that people that have really shitty lives, for instance, that are living in very sort of meager or modest circumstances or socioeconomic conditions, would be the ones that are most likely to take their own lives. But in fact, the people who are most vulnerable to suicide are those that have been accustomed to sort of a high standard of living. They've done really well, and then there's this sort of really rapid fall. And it's the juxtaposition between the life that they know and the life that they're currently living, that gap in status, especially in terms of how other people might view them, that makes them especially susceptible, I suppose, to suicidal thinking. So you talked about your grandfather, for instance, killing himself in the wake of your grandmother's death. That is not uncommon, because it's a sort of trend where you become really accustomed to a certain sort of standard of living in terms of relationships. If you're with somebody for a very long time and you're used to being in a stable, predictable sort of relationship that is high quality, and then all of a sudden you lose that through death or divorce or whatever, you become, after a long time, you're married, and then all of a sudden you're single. That's where the sort of the dangerous time period is, and that immediate transition to become this sort of new status as a widower or a widow or divorced or single. Whereas if you've never been married, you're not quite as vulnerable.
Yeah.
And likewise, if you lose your job, you've got a really high status position, for instance, and all of a sudden you lose your job, or you're a celebrity and now you're a has-been, it's this liminal space between success or sort of high quality of life to trying to adjust rapidly to this new social status. And that's why people that go to jail or to prison, in the first few weeks, that's why they're typically on suicide watch, because it's it's that sort of dramatic shift between what the life that they knew and what they're living right now that makes for a really sort of dangerous concoction psychologically. The longer you're in it, the more you can adapt to it.
Yeah.
But it's that sort of immediate transition where you lose your footing.
That's what did surprise me in your book, where you said about, it's usually high status people that commit suicide, because you'd think that somebody at the bottom would be more vulnerable to suicide. So
they become more accustomed to it. I mean, that's sort of, they don't know anything else aside from the people that have sort of had challenging, difficult circumstances, have learned to adjust and cope to that over many years. But it's that shift, that rapid shift, that makes it really dangerous.
Yeah, because when people see that celebrities are depressed or commit suicide, they say, "Oh, what are they complaining about? They've got everything." But like you say, it's the fall, isn't it?
Yeah.
In your book, you listed some traits associated with suicide: sensitivity, perfectionism, impulsiveness, and self-blaming, etc. These traits are very human. So why are they so important to some people that it causes a problem?
Well, everybody has, like you say, everybody has these traits to some extent, but there are individual differences in the extent to which we, psychologically, the extent to which we focus on them or which they sort of dominate our thinking. So some people, I mean, you often hear this sort of common refrain that, I don't care what other people think about me. I'm going to live my life and, whatever. I think that's bullshit, frankly. I think everybody cares what other people think about them. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But there are meaningful differences in the extent to which people are concerned about what other people think about them. So it's people that are very sensitive, I suppose, to this sort of hypervigilance to other people's evaluations or thinking that that makes certain people more vulnerable to suicidal ideology than others. So I do think that there are differences in social cognition to the extent of some people. There really are some people that are fairly oblivious to other people's judgment and evaluation of them. But for most of us, we put a lot of emotional stock into that. It's a really uncomfortable, position to be in for people to think that everybody hates you, for instance. So I think that this is really difficult right now in the sort of social media age, where it's so exacerbated people's sort of judgment of you and evaluation of you and how they feel about you, and sort of hundreds of thousands of people sort of grouping up against you. That's really anomalous from an evolutionary perspective, in terms of how we think about ourselves and our value, and what we've done to offend others and our place in society. I mean, it's a really sort of unusual time historically because of technology.
And why do you think that suicide is more prevalent in males than females?
It's not entirely clear, to be honest. I think that there are theories and hypotheses about why there's a sex difference in suicidal behavior. I mean, there are these sort of off-cited trends where women are much more likely to attempt suicide, to engage in suicidal behaviors than males are, but men are much more likely to be successful, I guess, in actually taking their own lives. And a lot of it boils down to the methods that they use. So women are, by and large, much more likely to use non-lethal means of of suicide. So drug overdoses, slitting their wrists, that sort of thing. Whereas men are much more likely to sort of shoot themselves in the head or jump off, a bridge or something like that. And there are, like I said, there are hypotheses about that. One is that that women are more parasuicidal in their intentionality. They are more likely to seek. They are genuine sort of in their intent to kill themselves, but they use less lethal means because they have this sort of hope that somebody will recognize their cry for help and will intervene to actually give them the support that they need. Whereas men realize that whatever they've done is sort of unforgivable and is irredeemable, and are more likely to take a sort of terminal, make a terminal decision in terms of their suicidal behavior. There's another hypothesis that I don't know how much stock I put into this, to be honest, but it's basically that women are more empathetic in their suicidal behaviors, in the sense that they're more concerned with how it will affect people who discover their bodies. So they try to engage in behaviors that are going to be less traumatic, I guess, for people who discover them.
Yeah.
So it's pretty gruesome, obviously, to come across somebody who's killed themselves by using a shotgun, to kill themselves, whereas taking a drug overdose in the bathtub or something, that would be a little less devastating, I guess, to the person who discovers you. But I don't know. I mean, it's kind of just speculative in terms of that interpretation. And it's weird to think of these things in sexist terms, I guess, when you think about suicide, because it's, both sexes kill themselves. But yes, I mean, there really is sort of an interesting gender divide in terms of lethality of the acts.
Yeah, we've got a train station that's close to me that's very famous for guys committing suicide. They stand on the edge of the platform, and when the train comes, they lean forward and just put their head in front of the train. And that's happened many times.
Yeah. And I think, that also touches on this other issue of when you're in a genuinely suicidal state and you really want to end your life, and I write in the book about these sort of cognitive distortions that we experience. We tend to be exceedingly egocentric in our mental state, which means that we literally have the incapacity to take the perspective of others that are finding our bodies, or how it's going to sort of traumatically impact the rest of their lives, family members, for instance.
Yeah.
Such a such a sort of narrow constriction of attention to our own problems that we literally can't take the perspective of others and how our death will affect them. So it's not so much that we're selfish, it's that we are incapable cognitively of thinking about how it's going to affect other people's psychological existence for the rest of their lives, to live with our death, and ask themselves these terrible questions about why did they do it, and so on.
Well, we've talked about the standards that you have for yourself, perfectionism, etc. Do you think that because those standards are too high, that if we could lower those standards, if we could get them more realistic, there would be less suicide? Or do you not think when you're in that state, it's possible to do that?
I think it's, one of the reasons that I wrote the book was to try to encourage people who are presently experiencing suicidal thoughts to take this sort of intellectual perspective of their own problems, and to stand outside of themselves, so to speak, and evaluate rationally what their emotional experiences are from what's happening sort of in the grander scheme of things, or psychologically, evolutionarily, cognitively, to sort of have that distance and evaluate themselves as a sort of specimen, to stand apart from themselves and to look at themselves as just another organism sort of in the system. And if they can distance themselves enough for long enough, by the time, they can sort of take that perspective, oftentimes the suicidal drive or that impulse will have subsided enough for them to survive. So I don't know if it's easy for people to lower their standards in terms of what they expect of themselves and their perfectionism, because I think those are largely sort of innate, inborn, really difficult to override aspects of human personality. But I do think that it's possible to distance yourself, at least temporarily, from your emotions by taking a sort of intellectual, academic perspective of your own circumstances and try to evaluate yourself from a distance. And like I said, if you can do it long enough, you can escape that intense impulse and live long enough to survive. So acute suicidal ideation rarely lasts longer for about 24 hours. This is one of the most important messages, I think, in the book, that emotional flooding where you just want to shoot yourself in the head or jump off a bridge or overdose or whatever. If you can wait it out for about 24 hours, it will usually subside in intensity and you can survive. It doesn't mean that it's not going to come back or it's not still there, but that urge to kill yourself will be diluted if you can just kind of wait it out. So one of my favorite suicidologists, the researcher in suicide, is Edwin Schneidman. He had this great quote. He said, "Never kill yourself when you're suicidal." And I think there's a logic to that, because it means that you're not thinking clearly enough to make a rational decision.
Yeah. Is suicide ever rational though?
Well, that's where I struggle in terms of the message that I'm communicating, because I think it's complicated. And my book, it was difficult to talk about the sort of the message of my book, because it's not like a moralistic sort of don't kill yourself no matter what, because I think that
I saw that. Yeah,
philosophically it's an incredibly complicated, convoluted topic, and it's not a book that is trying to convince everybody that suicide is never a rational or logical decision, because I think that there are some cases or circumstances under which logically, rationally, it makes sense. It doesn't mean that we should kill ourselves when it becomes incredibly difficult, or there's no sort of rationale for optimism, because I think that delusion can be adaptive in its own right. But the main message of the book was that it is complicated, that there isn't a clear sort of black and white answer to this question. I've had loads of emails from people since I wrote the book and about sort of really concrete, difficult cases that people are sort of pitching at me, like, well, don't you think I should, don't you think it's rational under these circumstances to take my own life? And yes, I think that in some cases it is rational, but that doesn't mean that you have to, or that you should.
Yeah.
And I think that all else being equal, I think the answer that I give to most of these people is that we have a very limited time on Earth, and unless you're under sort of excruciating physical distress and your emotional or psychological turmoil could be addressed in some way, that you should just live it out. It's only a limited period of time that we're here. We're just here for a fleeting period. Even 100 years is nothing. It's an eye blink. in terms of, cosmic time. So see it out, finish it, and anything can happen. And I really do believe that. I think that circumstances can change dramatically and unpredictably in ways that we don't possibly anticipate. And I think there is reason for optimism in that sense.
What I did like about your book was what you've just said, that it wasn't a book that said, no, don't do it. And I found that refreshing in a morbid kind of way. Oh, bless. Oh.
Yeah, how could I leave somebody like him alone?
Oh, yeah, exactly. How could you leave that? Oh, he's beautiful. Yeah, it was refreshing in a morbid kind of way to read that.
Yeah, and I think that there are so many suicide prevention books and sort of diagnostic, sort of clinical books about suicide prevention that I didn't just want to add to the chorus. I mean, I think we've got to be honest with ourselves as human beings that it's fucking hard to be a human being. There are loads of problems that we're going to run into, but also even we're all in this together, no matter how shitty it is, and if you can find one person that can commiserate with you, that's all you fucking need.
Yeah.
That's all you really need. I mean, just one person in this entire universe who can understand you. Fuck everybody else. I mean, resonating with the sort of psychological universe of another person's experience is oftentimes all you need.
Well, the one stage that I did really understand and resonated with me in your book was to escape the pain of life. We've just discussed a bit of that. After my abuse, it was I just really didn't want to live anymore. It was just too painful to live. Why do you think that people think that the only way out is suicide?
So you're talking about, I've got a chapter in the book about Roy Baumeister's stages of suicidal thinking. And they're progressive in how you slip from one stage to the next until you actually kill yourself. Like I said, I think that there are cognitive distortions that when you're in a genuinely suicidal state of mind that make suicide more appealing or alluring than they would be in your normal sort of lucid state. So one of them, for instance, is this distorted perception of time. Time when you're suicidal, time seems to drag on really slowly. It just kind of drips out minute by minute, and it feels excruciating that it's going so slowly. And that's why, I talk about in the book that when I was in my 20s and I was suicidal and talking to somebody who was in their 90s, I was almost jealous of them that they had such a short period of time to live, where my, that sort of gulf between your 20s and your 90s might as well be infinity. And I couldn't imagine all of the excruciating psychological experiences that I would have to endure over that period of time. So I think that we are seduced cognitively by this what's so sort of attractive, I suppose, is this absence of thinking. It's not, it's basically the appeal of mindlessness. You don't want to think. When I was suicidal, the periods of time in my life where I've been suicidal, when I get depressed, I find myself sleeping a lot. And what's so attractive about that, I suppose, is that especially the times where I'm not dreaming, that I just kind of disappear. And it's almost a disappointment when you have to wake up and again, you're sort of thinking and ruminating. So it's that burden of cognitive activity, I guess, that is so exhausting. And just wanting to make it all stop. It's not trying to have a better life, it's trying to have no life, right? It's trying to put a period to the end of the sentence where your circumstances don't change, but you no longer have to deal with anything. But I think that the irony is that people who are genuinely suicidal also, this sounds weird, but I think that they don't necessarily want to die. They want to fix whatever particular problem that they have at the time. Like they want to be something else, anything else. They just don't want to have to sort of continue thinking about this particular problem.
Yeah.
And if you could fix that problem somehow, then they would be as enthusiastic as anybody ever was about living.
Wow. And many things surprised me about your book. And one of the things that surprised me was only 30% of those who commit suicide write a letter.
Yeah.
And most of the letters that are written are positive or practical.
Right. So this is a sort of this cognitive stage of deconstruction where you are in a suicidal state. You are sort of focused on the immediate present, sort of the practical considerations of what's happening. So your ability to engage in abstract, theoretical, sort of distant thought is severely compromised. So you're much more focused on whatever it is that's sort of breathing it out of your neck or knocking out your door, these sort of immediate threats to your existence. And that can translate to paying the bills, to who's going to feed the pets, to all these sorts of really sort of concrete issues. You're not thinking about, like I said, you're not thinking about how it's going to impact your loved ones or what, whether you're going to be punished in hell, something really abstract and theoretical like that. It's much more about the sort of this sort of really narrowed, constricted present. And most people, when they kill themselves, it's such a flash flood of emotions that they don't even get to the point of having time to sit down and write a letter.
Yeah.
They just want to end it immediately because it's so powerful at that moment. It's so overwhelming at that moment. But those that do get to that stage and can write a note are much more, and you can actually see it in their suicide notes. So the language that they use, it's much more egocentric. Like I said, that you're going to find much more reference to words like, just personal pronouns like me and I, talking about them than you are about talking about other people. You can actually do qualitative analysis of the text to find out cognitively what people are experiencing as they're suicidal, if you look at suicide notes. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, most people don't even get to they're not even able to write a suicide note, which I think just shows how, immediately in the present they are, and just so overwhelmed by the emotional experience.
And another thing that I found fascinating about your book is that in the US there are more suicides by gun than homicides.
Yeah, dramatically more. Yeah.
And I find that shocking.
Well, I think that most people who have guns, or are interested in getting guns, are concerned about the threats from other people. But in fact, you're much more dangerous to yourself as an assailant, as somebody who would take your own life than other people are. And I'm not a sort of anti-gun activist or anything like that, but but I do know, just intellectually, because I've had these experiences, that if I had a gun, I probably would have killed myself a long time ago, because it's such an easy way to kill yourself. It's just a flick of your finger. It's like an on and off switch. It's so easy. And if you are in these sort of weird cognitive states that motivate suicidal behavior, the fact that you have a gun in your house is going to be much more likely to translate into an actual suicide than not. So I've deliberately avoided having a gun anywhere near me, because I know that I'm likely to lapse into that state at any time. And the fact that I have it so readily at my disposal makes it very dangerous. So I think a lot of it has to do with emotional forecasting, the ability to project yourself into a future emotional state that you're not necessarily anticipating right now, or you have right now, but you've had it before and it's possible. So the more you can do to protect yourself preemptively, the better.
And you've just said that, like, if you had the gun in the house, then you would have done it. And in your book, you say that the next time I think about suicide, not if, you believe that you definitely will think about suicide. So
not if, but when. Yes.
Yeah. So why is that? Why do you think that you definitely are going to think about suicide? Do you still
Because I know
feel like that sometimes?
Yeah, I know myself, and I think that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And I know my vulnerabilities. I know the likelihood of me slipping into these mental states again. I would say that they are fairly high. And part of the reason that I wrote the book, I suppose, was this sort of insurance policy that I wrote it to remind myself of these academic sort of intellectual factors. If I ever find myself in this state again, to distance myself from the overwhelming burden of my emotions at any given time. And the things haven't changed. I mean, I wrote the book 5 years ago, but I'm still sensitive. I'm still emotional. I'm still a perfectionist. So this is who I am, and I can live with being a potentially suicidal person for the rest of my life, as long as I can manage it.
And do you feel more in control now?
Yes, I think that I think that just gathering the resources of the hard-won resources, both of myself but other researchers in this area, have given me power, I guess, over my own decision making, because I can help convince myself that this is not something that will last. This is a fleeting moment, that this is something that will pass.
Yeah. And are we the only creatures that commit suicide?
My opinion is that we are. That what makes us so distinct from other species is sort of a double-edged sword, that we are deeply. So it's, again, this sort of theory of mind ability, this social cognitive ability to take the perspective of others, that the benefits of this is that we can experience pride, and we can sympathize or empathize with others and sort of understand where somebody else is coming from. But the other side to that, the more negative side, is that we are sort of have the potential to experience shame and judgment, and feeling like we are being evaluated, being judged as good or bad by others. And I think that is something that is a human cognitive specialization. It doesn't make us better than other species. I mean, in fact, I mean, I wouldn't wish these types of emotions on other animals at all. You know, I hope my dogs aren't ever suicidal, or, you know, because I think it's a horrible thing. But it comes
You
with
talked
being
about
human.
your cat possibly being suicidal.
Yeah, my cat scaling a tree and being at the top of the tree, and I'm not being able to get my cat out of the tree. But I don't. Yeah, I think that a lot of that is anthropomorphism and just looking at other species behaviors through the lens of human psychology.
We've talked about why we kill ourselves. How do we stop it now?
I think having an awareness of the psychological processes that that motivate suicidal thinking is half the battle.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that struck me with writing this book was that a lot of people that are, you know, you oftentimes hear these stories of people that, well, I never knew he was that depressed or that upset or that, you know, had any sort of mental problems, and so they're sort of shocked by suicide. And I think those stories are important because it just goes to show that we have only a very limited awareness of the depths of suffering that other people are experiencing. There's only so much that we can know about other people's subjective lives or experiences. And having an understanding of the cognitive stages that we graduate to in terms of our suicidal impulse or suicidal thinking, I think is critical, because a lot of people are shocked to sort of find themselves suicidal. They don't identify as somebody who would ever be suicidal. And all of a sudden they've got a gun to their head.
Mm-hmm.
So they never saw themselves as having mental illness or, you know, being somebody who would ever take their own lives, but yet here they are. And I think recognizing that we are all potentially vulnerable to suicide, I think as a species, as human beings,
yeah,
all of us are potentially suicidal. That's one of the messages of my book.
Mm-hmm.
If you push the right buttons, everybody can find themselves in this situation. And recognizing that, and when you're in the throes of suicidal thinking, can help you get that sort of emotional or psychological distance from yourself to live it out, to sort of survive and understand what's happening to you.
Mm-hmm.
So that distance, sort of cognitive distancing, I think is critical. I mean, I'm a rationalist. My defense mechanism, I suppose, would be this sort of intellectualizing. So it works for me, but I also think it works for a lot of other people too, or could potentially, if they were aware of what was happening to them, because it's so easy to be just blindsided by your emotions. Emotions are incredibly powerful.
And if somebody was having suicidal thoughts right now, what would be your advice?
That again, it will pass.
Mm-hmm.
The acuteness of what you're experiencing right now, this urgency to take your own life, to kill yourself, to end it all, it will subside in intensity within a period of about 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's have a conversation. You know, if you can, whatever it takes to distract yourself, I guess, from the intensity of the emotions that you're experiencing now, whether it's, you know, I talk about how in the book, I talk about how one of the things that helped me, that saved me when I was in my 20s and feeling these feelings, was I became just obsessed with reading. I would read everything I possibly could. Didn't matter how horrible the book was. You know, I was reading trashy romance novels, whatever. It was just replacing my thoughts with the thoughts of somebody else. It was like putting on a glove.
Yeah.
To take myself out of my own head and have the point of view of another character, another person, and not have that constant ruminating about my own problems. And that saved me in the moment, but it also gave me enough time, I guess, to sort of distance myself from that intensity of emotion to make a more informed decision about my actions. So wait it out, I guess, would be my take-home message.
And you've spoke very openly, very honestly today about your you've been depressed and you've been suicidal. Are you happy now?
I hesitate to say it, but yeah, I'm happy. I think I don't like to use the word happy because it's such a sort of meaningless word. I think happiness is the absence of worry. And
Okay.
Right now, I'm not burdened or preoccupied in terms of anxiety and stress and worry that I was or that I have been in the past. And again, it's like a toothache. I say this in the book. It's like a sort of recurring toothache that it flares up, it goes away, comes back, goes away. At the moment, it's okay. Like at the moment, I'm okay. Like I'm happy in that sense that I'm not preoccupied with negative thoughts and anxiety and worry and stress. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a case in point about how things can get better, as cliche as it sounds.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you're happy.
Yeah. But I'm also, like I said, I'm also not so naive to say that to think that I won't have a recrudescence, I guess, or reappearance of these negative emotions in the future. I think that in all likelihood I will, but I want to be armed intellectually and psychologically when I have to face those battles again.
And finally, what's next for Jesse Bering?
Who knows? I mean, I'm so busy with lots of things. My next book is on related to this, I suppose. It's on the psychology of afterlife beliefs and trying to get a perspective of how people think about their personal consciousness after biological death. It's an incredibly rich, provocative area to explore. Personally, I don't believe that there's anything after death. I'm a materialist. I believe that when your brain stops functioning, your psychological experience ends. Because in the absence of a brain, then what exactly is fueling your consciousness? But I think that there are many interesting questions to explore with this, and that's the book I'm writing now.
Yeah, excellent. I'll be really interested in that. I don't believe there's anything after death either, and it scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, it scares me too, but it's also really fascinating and it's interesting, and I think I like the fact that I can indulge myself, I guess, in alternative theories.
Awesome.
In writing this book, so it'll be a little ways out, but I'm writing that now.
And we've spoken about suicide, which is quite a dark subject. So, one last final question. Why is the penis shaped like that?
That's a big one. That's a big one. Sorry, that's a bad pun too. And let me just point out that that's just one essay in that particular book. Right?
Yeah. There's some great essays in that.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, the answer is that the human penis is shaped like that to extract the sperm cells of competitive males that have had sex with the same female partner within about a 48-hour period of time, which is the lifetime of a sperm cell in the human reproductive canal. So the coronal ridge of the phallus, with the head of the penis basically retracts or withdraws the sperm cells of other men who have had sex with that same female over that period of time. So it actually reveals quite a lot about human sexuality in the ancestral past and monogamy and the number of reproductive partners that we have and so on. So yeah, read the book if you're more interested in that particular topic.
This is a fascinating book, as well as your book on suicide, and as well as the book Perv, which is just awesome.
Thanks.
And I really want to thank you for talking to me today. It's been really great talking to you, and I'm a really big fan of your writing.
Oh, thanks so much. And sorry for the depressing topics today, but I do appreciate your interest in it, and I'm very happy to talk with any of your listeners that want to continue the conversation. So thanks.
Cheers.
So much.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
Okay.
Much appreciated. Take care now.